Welcome back to Mac Stories Unwind. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Viticci. Hey, what's going on, Federico?
Hello, John. How are you?
Oh, you're an international man of mystery. You've been all over the
Am
place. Yeah, you are. You've been traveling around. You're sending these sneaky shots of Big Ben and stuff like that. I think it was Big Ben, or maybe it was...
It was Big Ben. It was Big
Okay.
Ben.
All right.
And friend of the show, Mike Hurley, told me that actually the Big Ben clock is not the biggest one in London. There's another clock that doesn't look like it, and he made me look at it, from a distance.
Yeah?
And you wouldn't think that it is, but there's actually another white giant clock that is bigger than Big Ben. There's your information.
It's really small Ben.
It's more like medium Ben, really.
Okay. We'll call it medium Ben from now on. I think that'll stick. I think it'll stick.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk to you before we get into picks and other things. I wanted to talk to you about this ad that has created an uproar for Apple called Crushed. How about that? So you were at the iPad event, the Let Loose event in London, which maybe we'll talk about a little bit more later. But one of the things, it opened with this commercial, and it was, I think that's being aired on television, but in any event, it was a short little film where there was like this big, I don't know what would you call it. It was almost like a stack of all sorts of stuff. It was like a TV and musical instruments and paint and
analog
toys.
objects. Yeah.
Right. And that's a good way of putting it. Analog objects, all related to like the arts in some way. And it was sitting on a big press, and the press, sitting on the bottom of the press, the top of the press came down and crushed it all. And at the very bottom, when it got to the bottom, there was like this big poof of color that came out. And there's, like paint dripping down the sides in bright colors. And when they lifted the press, what was sitting there but an iPad Pro?
Yeah.
And I know from having talked to you that you had a moment of kind of unease watching all these musical instruments and other objects being crushed. And I did feel that pang myself when I was watching. I was like, okay. I mean,
I was like, oh, it's like, come on, why crash the trumpet and the guitar? Yes, that's
right. Like what's going on here? Why is this being done? But I will admit, I did not really think much of it. It did not outrage me. I'll put it that way. I didn't think it was a particularly good ad. And thinking about it in retrospect, I think it should have been, I think that the biggest problem with it is that it is focusing on the destruction first and foremost before the creation. And I think the idea was we have packed all of these tools into this incredibly thin device that you can use to do all these things that you would otherwise need all these other things to do.
Right.
And I think that is separate and apart from the visuals, that is like a fine marketing message. Here's an iPad, you can do lots of things with it, is really all is what the message was. But the way they went about it, doing it in this kind of destructive way, like they were cramming all this stuff into the technology, I think it sat wrong with a lot of people, obviously. I've seen it written about everywhere from the New York Times to the Atlantic to, Hugh Grant commenting on it on X to all sorts of places. And I think that what it did is it hit this kind of visceral chord with people that is particularly, I'm not sure it's completely about Apple, because I think part of it is there is a raw spot after things like the strikes in Hollywood and the disputes over AI, where there is this distrust amongst creative people of technology and whether technology is trying to make them obsolete. And that this triggered that for a lot of people when, because of what's been going on in the world lately.
Yeah. So I think this is a very complex issue, and I'm going to try my best to sum up my thoughts. Obviously, we all know that computers and tablets have replaced or can replace previous physical tools, whether they're musical instruments or books or specific equipment, right? We all know that, and it's fine. We all know that GarageBand exists. We all know that Logic exists. We all know that,
it's nothing new. It's as old as computers in that sense.
Right. The role of the computer is to give you more power to be creative, without having to carry around a ton of different pieces of equipment. And we are all fine with that. The problem, I think, is that humans are visual creatures in many ways. And we tend to react much more strongly to images, to things that we see. And those things that we see, they create an emotion inside of us. I mean, that is literally the role of advertising, right?
Right. And that's why movies are so popular.
Exactly. Or YouTubers, I mean, it's all about that. It's about the fact that humans, they resonate a lot with things that they see. There's literally millennia of history here at play. And so the image of seeing that, what is it, like an hydraulic press?
I think so.
Crushing the musical instruments. I think it's especially the books and the musical instruments that people sort of react to. It's this, like you said, it's this destructive image of here comes big tech crushing all these tools that professional artists still use, because at the end of the day, all you need is a very thin tablet. And obviously, the message that Apple wanted to convey was not one of, we are big tech, we are going to crush your guitars, we're going to crush your books, we're going to crush your TVs and video game consoles. They wanted to say, look at this tablet, it contains all these functionalities within this very thin shell. And I understand that, but if I could sum up the problem here, it would be this advertisement did not read the room.
100%.
We are living in this very particular era where there's a lot of unease and distrust regarding tools like artificial intelligence, for example, that are actually stealing creative people's content to regurgitate stuff that is created by AI. That is one of the reasons behind the several months long strikes in Hollywood, recently. That is literally one of the reasons. People in all fields are concerned, whether it's in the film industry, in the music industry, in the blogging industry. Folks are concerned that computers and tech are going to replace them just by simply spitting out content that was produced by a large language model. And so I do think that even though the intention behind the ad was genuinely one that wanted to convey the message of this powerful computer that you can carry with you, can do all these things, it gets perceived because of the visuals as another message.
Right.
And I think there could have been many other ways to convey that message. There's a popular edit of that video, which simply plays the ad in reverse, basically seeing how from this iPad, all these musical instruments and TVs and books are emerging from the computer. And I actually think that could have been a much better message of like...
Yeah, something along those lines. I agree, where what you're showing is the creative act that is enabled by the device, as opposed to what is crammed into the device. Showing a beautiful painting that someone created, or a movie that they made, or a song that they composed, all those kinds of things, as opposed to making it look as though you have reduced humanity's culture into a thin piece of glass.
Yeah, and I've seen some comments from people saying like, oh, these people who are making a big fuss about this ad, they're just seeking, social clout and likes and clicks. And I do think that to an extent that is true. There are plenty of people who are just piling on for the sake of getting some likes on Instagram or X. But I don't think Hugh Grant needs social clout.
No.
I don't think once a message, like you have to ask yourself, and I'm sure Apple PR is now dealing with this. Like you should ask yourself, maybe this message got misinterpreted by people in a way that we did not expect. And that's a problem in and of itself. Like, why didn't your advertising agency or your creative people expect this sort of reaction?
Yep.
But all this to say, like, I was there at the event and I saw the commercial in real time, and it's not like I was shocked and I started crying, but I did feel for a moment, especially with the trumpet, which is the first to go, and the guitar, I did feel a moment of like, oh, poor guitar,
Right.
that sort of
Right.
feeling. And yeah, I do think that this is a misstep. And now, obviously, I'm not suggesting that oh, here comes Apple, it's big tech, they're gonna crush your industries because they just want to sell you an expensive tablet. No, I don't think that. But I do think that in some instances, you think that a commercial needs to convey a certain message, but different parts of your audience react to it in a different way. And if anything, it's a good learning opportunity for Apple and their advertising agencies. I don't know who's behind this commercial, but it's definitely an opportunity to sort of step back and reassess and maybe think how their images get perceived by people.
That's true. I think it's actually a good opportunity for people who were offended by the commercial too to think a little harder about what about it bothered them. Because
Yes.
to my mind, what I find personally far more upsetting is the idea of the kind of things that OpenAI, for instance, is doing.
Oh, yeah.
Which is, basically, I call it strip mining the internet, basically taking the world's writing and images and everything and condensing them into these large language models that spit things back via a chatbot. That to me is out and out stealing, and it's going on. It's already gone on for a long time. Whereas, I mean, Apple made a misstep. They made a commercial that read the room wrong and upset a lot of people. But OpenAI is out there actually, OpenAI and other companies like it are out there doing a lot more already.
Actively stealing people's content.
Yeah. And so to me, it's like, well, okay, I totally understand why people are upset, but I would think I would take that emotion and think about where it is maybe perhaps I would suggest a little better placed, which is what is actually happening in the technology world today with people, with companies taking all this creative work off the internet and actively making, whether it's game designers by having these AI generated NPCs, or whether it's actors who are being dropped into scenes and no longer able to work, or whether it's writers being put out of work because there's copy being automatically generated by large language models. There's a lot of stuff that's going on today that I think is a more immediate threat than the notion of Apple using the iPad to crush cultures. But that said, I do understand why it upset people. I just think it's one of those things where it's worth kind of like reflecting on, I think, why that upset people and where that upset ought to be directed. So
yeah, that is true, but we'll see. I do think this ad will be pulled.
I agree 100%. I think it was not a good idea, and I do think that no company should be making an ad that where the focus is on destruction. I think that there's only bad things that can come from that, really.
Yeah, I do think that this ad will be pulled and Apple will release a statement, which at the moment of recording this, it's Thursday evening, my 7 p.m. They still haven't, but I think they will.
All right, Federico, tell me a little bit more about your trip to London.
It was great. I was able to explore an area of London that I had never seen before, which is the South Bank. So the South Bank of the Thames, and I had never been there, and I was not expecting that area to be so lovely. It was also a lovely day weather-wise, which was unexpected. I mean, not to reinforce the stereotypical London weather, but it was actually like blue skies and kind of warm out. I met up with Mike, and we took a nice long walk along the South Bank, and then we went for a brunch together, and then we took the tube at Waterloo Station, and we got off at Battersea Power Station. And just going there and watching the building, approaching the building from the tube station, it is like the scale of the building is massive. And it reinforces, like when you look at it, it plays right into one of London's, I think, most unique characteristics, which is I was actually talking about this with Mike. The contrast that you have in London between old and new,
Right.
because big, big cities, they're either all new, like say you go to New York, it's all modern. Or you go to Rome, it's all old. Like you go to the center of Rome, everything is old. You don't have skyscrapers in the center
Right.
of Rome. Everything is old, either, from the actual Roman Empire or from the Renaissance era, from the Middle Ages, but everything is old. You don't have new glass buildings, for example. But in London, you do. You do have that constant mix of old structures and modern architectures. Sometimes they're actually blending together, like with for example, old towers with a building, like a modern building that was built around it, for example, like, so they're
Right,
sort of
right.
becoming one. And so when you arrive at Battersea Power Station, you have this power station that was renovated, but you can tell it's an old structure, and right in front of it you have these really modern hotels, like these really tall buildings entirely made of glass and steel. And so you do have that contrast. And the power station itself it's huge, not because it's like long, but because it's tall. Like these 4 chimneys that they have at the top of the power station, they're super tall and white. So you got that contrast with the brown bricks of the building and the white towers. It's
Yeah,
really quite a
it's a
sight.
big blocky building too,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. You have this big blocky building made of reddish, brownish bricks, and this white chimneys, these white towers that used to blow out smoke. Now they don't anymore. So the what I also didn't know, besides the fact that the South Bank in London is very nice, is that the Battersea Power Station, the low level floors are a traditional mall. The Apple
Hmm.
Store is there. A bunch of other stores for like watch brands and clothing brands are there. But then you go up these stairs and you enter the sort of the Apple check-in area. There's a front desk, and then you take these elevators. And these elevators, I believe, like they look like elevators designed by Johnny Ive. You step into these elevators. First of all, there are no buttons outside. You never call the elevator, I believe. You're
Huh.
always sort of escorted to the elevator. There's always somebody there. And inside the elevator, if my memory serves right, I didn't take a picture because I felt weird taking a picture of an elevator with other
Sure.
journalists around me. But I'm pretty sure there were no buttons. I think there was only like an emergency button, and all the walls of the elevator were white and with rounded corners. It was like the Apple elevator, literally. And then you go up to the 5th floor, I believe. That's where the Apple offices begin. They are located on multiple floors, and you go into this open atrium, and in this atrium you have balconies all around the atrium. And Apple had set up all these chairs in front of a stage for the press, and I believe there were like a couple hundred members of media, and Apple employees were sort of watching the event on the balconies all around us. And most likely also all those employees were also finding out what Apple was announcing
Sure.
during that moment. And so it was really quite the sight. And there was this sculpture, this 3D sculpted Apple logo that was sitting in front of this white wall. And we later learned that the white wall was actually temporary. It was covering up the hands-on area. And when I saw that Apple logo that was like hand-drawn and 3D sculpted, I had a theory that was done using a new version of the Apple Pencil in Vision OS, because it reminded me of those 3D sculpting apps that we've seen on the Vision Pro.
Sure.
But obviously, Apple did not announce Pencil Pro integration in Vision OS, although I stand by my theory. I think that they will. And I think that statue will prove me right eventually.
I think you're right. The statue, you sent me a picture of it. It looked a lot like those Apple logos that they used for the event, where there were different, like very artistically drawn Apple logos. We saw a similar thing when you went to Brooklyn that one time for
Yes.
an Apple event. It's a lot like those images, right?
Yeah, and I think my theory will be proven right eventually, just not yet. But yeah, and obviously after the event, there was a hands-on area, and it was much less crowded than any hands-on area in Cupertino, I can tell you. I was able to go there multiple times, and actually just later, because I was not in a rush. You can see all these
Right.
YouTubers and TikTokers always being in a rush, and they're recording video all the time. And so I took my time. I went there initially. I grabbed it. I played with it for like 30 seconds, and then I went back, grabbed the bottle of water, and I returned later, and I was able to just grab an iPad and use it for 5 minutes just by myself, because much
nice.
of the crowd had gone away. And so, yeah, it was actually a really nice experience. And I honestly hope that Apple will do more simultaneous US, UK events in the future, assuming that events are now sort of this communal experience of watching a video with other journalists.
Right.
I do hope that they simulcast these events again in the future between US and UK. Oh, and of course, we saw Greg Joswiak.
Right.
There was John Turnus. I met John Turnus at the hands-on area.
Nice.
And it was nice. It was a really nice day.
About how many people were there, Federico? Because I know John Gruber, I think, wrote that there were about 50 people in New York.
I would say 200.
Yeah, I thought it looked from the pictures you sent me like it was a much larger crowd than what John had mentioned in New York. Interesting.
And really diverse crowd. I believe they said the 30 countries were represented. And I can tell you a fun anecdote for Unwind. So at some point, I hear like a tap on my shoulder. I feel like a tap on my shoulder, and I turn, and there was this group of, I believe, from the context, Japanese journalists, because there were a lot of media people from Asia. Okay. And so one of these guys, he asks me, "Hey, did you buy this T-shirt? Where did you buy this T-shirt?" And I looked at him, I was like, in a store in Italy. And he started laughing. He's like, "Oh, so you didn't buy it in Tokyo?" And I was like, no, I got it from a store in Italy. And I believe, so I was wearing this T-shirt with like this Japanese style hand-drawn cat in the back of the T-shirt with some kanji, I believe, around it. Now, I realized that maybe this T-shirt that I bought in Rome has some funny meaning. I hope it's not an offensive meaning.
I hope not too.
That I didn't know. But these guys were having a good time making fun of my T-shirt, it seemed like. So I hope it was not, maybe it was something that didn't make any sense, like a bunch of characters put together by an Italian company who doesn't know any better. I feel kind of bad about, inadvertently culturally appropriating the Japanese alphabet, but these guys seem to be having a fun time making fun of my T-shirt, and so we had a good laugh, and that was it.
Okay, well, that's good. Very good. Well, it sounds like a great trip. I do hope that Apple does this more in the future too. I do think it's maybe a good sign that Apple is maybe trying to spread out and be a little less California centric, because I think they recognize that maybe that California centricity is part of maybe what got them in trouble with the DMA, and that there is a big part of their audience and their customers that live in Europe. And just from a logistics standpoint, it makes a lot of sense to have the press from Europe, Asia, and other places to have an easier place to get to. I don't know that it would be easier to get to London from Japan than it would be to California, but it is at least easier for people like you and other people throughout the
2 days in and out, super convenient. Yeah, more of this, please, in the future.
Yeah, definitely. All right, Federico, I think we're going to leave it at that for this week. We will be back with picks next week. I do want to mention just really briefly, though, that there is a new show on Apple TV Plus that looks really cool to me called Dark Matter, which is a sci-fi movie, or not a movie, a TV show. And it just started this week, so I don't think there are more than a couple of episodes out, but I think I'm going to give it a try this weekend. So check that out if you're interested in that kind of thing. But we will be back with more picks in the next week. Yeah. So until then, Federico, people can find us on macstories.net. We are on Mastodon. They can go to viticci.macstories.net and johnvorhees.macstories.net to find us there. And we're on Threads and Instagram. Federico is at Viticci, that's VITICCI, and I'm at John Voorhees, JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.